Welcome to the Coaster101 podcast. I'm Eric Woolley, along with Andrew Stillwell. This week we've got part 2 of our interview with veteran theme park designer Dave Cobb. If you missed part 1 last week, you should go back and listen to it, but we talked to Dave all about his start in the industry at Universal Studios, all the way up through his work as the creative director on Men in Black Alien Attack at Universal Florida. This week we're getting into basically everything Dave has worked on since, including designing some themed roller coasters and being the lead on an entire indoor theme park.
You've had some amazing stops in the industry, but I want to touch a little bit about your time as working with Paramount Parks. Obviously, my home park is a Paramount Park. Eric's home park is a Paramount Park. And then one of my home away from home parks, King's Dominion, also was a Paramount Park. Your rides, your credits include the Italian Job Stunt Track, which is now the Backlot Stunt Coaster.
Yeah.
And then Survivor the Ride, which is Tiki Twirl, and Tomb Raider Firefall at King's Dominion, which no longer exists.
Oh, did they tear it out? It was the crypt for a while.
It was the crypt.
It finally, or I guess the one at King's Island finally went away. The one at King's Dominion, I don't remember when it got taken out.
Yeah, I didn't work on the King's Island one. I only worked on the outdoor one, not the one that was kind of pseudo dark ride.
Yeah, the King's Dominion one's closed. It's It's a point of constant rumor in the nerd circles. So, Maggie, if you're listening, I didn't say anything. But, Dave, I guess my question here is, when you worked on these rides and they were so heavily based on like established IP, and then when Cedar Fair purchased the Paramount Parks and kind of genericized them, I think that's a word I just made up, but made them more generic. I mean, as a designer, kind of how does that make you feel? I mean, obviously parks have IP and licensing agreements, but does it make you feel like frustrated? That's like, I put so much work into this and now it's just like cars that aren't technically Mini Coopers, and this helicopter no longer works.
Look, I'm very proud of the work I did there because it was a big shift from working on destination parks with $80 million attractions to regional parks with $4 to $6 million attractions.
Mm-hmm.
That's not a slam. That was a piece of personal professional growth, actually, of learning what the difference is between those things and learning what the strengths of a regional park can be, and I was very, very, very lucky to have access to those IP. Italian Job's a perfect example where I pitched that idea because they were like, we need to do a coaster, we need some ideas, and I loved that movie, and it had come out a couple of years before, and I pitched the whole thing. So that's literally me from front to back, and I was very happy that we got to build it. I mean, it's disappointing that when the new owners don't want to continue the licensing agreement and aren't interested in IP, but what am I going to do? Shake my fist at a cloud like the old man in The Simpsons? Like, it doesn't do anybody any good. It doesn't make me any happier. So it's like, their business is what it is. Cedar Fair does a great job with what they have, and what they do is a very different kind of park, and it just didn't align, So I'm grateful for the work I had there. But it was it was a very different kind of work from what I had at Universal, and which I'm extremely grateful for. It was a really amazing couple of years working for them. And it was, again, a little bit happenstance, a little bit of luck, in that I was freelancing after Men in Black for many years, and I landed at a freelance gig at the Paramount lot in Hollywood. They had a small office that was related to consumer products like licensing, and they developed attractions and parks for overseas investors, meaning these are not Paramount Parks in air quotes. They're not Paramount Parks that the chain is going to invest in because they were regionals, but they were like a business model where we're going to charge people, oh, you want to use Paramount IP in your park? Great, write a check. So it was like, the business model was like, they would pay for the concept development of a park, and we'd give them a concept book and say, come back when you get funding, right? And we've all heard rumors of various Paramount Parks throughout the years. They'll do one eventually, but they're not really in the owner-operator business. That's not what they want to do. But I was one of their creative directors and attraction developers for a number of years freelance. And while I was there freelance, and it was for a former Landmark friend of mine who actually still runs a lot of the stuff there, while I was there doing freelance work, the Paramount Parks main offices, which were located in Charlotte near Carowinds, which is the old which is the old King's Entertainment offices for when those
Yep.
parks started back in the 70s. All of the work, creative work, marketing, food and beverage, overall chain management was all done there, right? They had a big restructure and reorganization, and a lot of the creative folks left and went to Hershend, as you know, and Anthony Esparza and a bunch of those folks, and then who then on went on to SeaWorld and things. But all the creative work in Charlotte stopped, and so the only thing the Charlotte office was doing was food and beverage, merchandise, and marketing. And so they turned to the office in LA, who was doing all this creative development, and said, "All right, your turn." So overnight, I went from developing big speculative blue sky whatever with major Paramount IP to, all right, you have 5 parks in the US and your capital for every park every year is like probably less than $6 or $8 million. Go. And all of a sudden I was the sort of default creative director for a small regional, not even small, major regional park chain around the US. And so to be handed that so randomly, and again, it sounds like, God, you're so lucky. And it's like, well, it's yes, in one way, but it's also just timing. It's just like, well, I'm here and it's different than the work I've been doing, but the same in a way. And I loved working for Paramount Parks. It was like a scrappier sandbox. It was a little less corporate than the big parks. And you know, the GMs of all those parks that I got to work with, they're all different guys and they all know their local market really well. And regional parks have their own internal corporate culture, even if they were owned by Paramount all at once. They have their own, and learning that in each location was a lot of fun. And I had a great time working for Paramount.
That's awesome. And then following Paramount, you had some time at the Thinkwell Group, and that you were there about 12 years, I'm seeing.
13, almost 13.
Almost 13. So for the uninitiated, what were some of the projects you worked on with Thinkwell?
Oh, goodness. Well, the first thing to know is a company like Thinkwell, who does, work for hire, and that's for theme parks, museums, what have you, does a lot of not speculative work, stuff we get paid for, but it's concept work, maybe even schematic design, but for projects that never get built. I have more, moving boxes full of concepts that never got built than I do things that I actually got built. Like it's not an industry where everything you do actually happens. And that's just because of the economics of theme parks, frankly. It's not an industry where you design a widget that gets replicated 5 million places all over the world in different stores. You build one thing for one place and that's it. And so the economics of how those places happen is a lot more stringent and based on world economies and lots and lots of forecasting, right? There's feasibility studies for this park. So when people say, why don't you build one of those Warner Brothers indoor parks in the cold up in the northern part of the US, it would make a lot of money. It's like, no, it won't actually. Here's why, because the economics just don't work out. So, but I did a ton of work. Thinkwell was home for me for a very long time. I'm very sad to have gone, but it's all due to COVID. I'm still very good friends with everybody there, obviously. They're a great company and they do really amazing work. And I'm not only proud of the work I did there, I'm proud of the corporate and company culture that I helped build there, to be honest. Because when I started, there were like 30 people and we were, over 200 or so by the time I left. And so, and not only doing that, but building, the largest indoor theme park in the world is no small matter. So
absolutely,
I'm exceedingly proud of the work I did there. But a lot of work I did there never saw the light of day, which is, people hear that and they think that I must be disappointed by it. And it's like, no, because in this business, even if something doesn't get built, you file it away. And then later on, when another client comes, you go, oh, wait, there's this thing we didn't do. Let's adapt that now. And so all it does is it builds your internal creative repertoire. It doesn't matter if it's built or not. It expands your experience, whether or not it's built.
Got it. Well, you did touch on it, but the Warner Brothers World Abu Dhabi, the world's largest indoor theme park. I've looked at YouTube videos of this thing this week in preparation for this interview. I am blown away. I can't process what I'm seeing, how it happens. But, For the most basic question, what was your level of involvement with the Warner Brothers World Abu Dhabi?
I was brought in right at the beginning. They had done a little bit of Blue Sky, and I was basically park-wide creative director for the whole thing for almost 10 years, a little over 10 years, actually.
Wow.
Craig Hanna was my boss at Thinkwell. He was the creative executive for the park. But I sort of oversaw the team for the park and the attractions and oversaw creative development of every single attraction, leveraging the Warner Brothers and DC brands. 23 different attractions ranging from flight simulators to coasters to moving motion bases to KUKA arms to spinny flat rides to what have you. And not only the physical part of laying out a theme park and building attractions, but also just playing in those IP worlds that until then had really never been done at that scale or budget, right? Like
Yeah, right.
Warner Brothers and DC have a long history with some of the regional parks and have done really fun stuff, but they'd never really done. I mean, they had experience with Universal on Potter, of course, which was not part of our park. But Warner Brothers as a company had experience with fully immersive parks. They were one of the first to do that level of immersion, right?
Yeah.
Potter changed the world in a lot of ways. But the what they call Warner Brothers Classic Animation, which is Looney Tunes, Hanna-Barbera, Tom and Jerry, and Warner Brothers and DC Comics, excuse me, those brands had never really been done at that level of immersion. So they were very invested in making it cool and making it good. And so our creative partners at Warner Brothers were a huge part of that. It wasn't just Thinkwell. And not only that, but our partnership with the owner operator, who was very visionary, and obviously that region is burgeoning and spending a lot of money, and so we had we had the benefit of a really, really generous budget for a place like this, and we had the benefit of it being indoors because of the climate, right? So it was a perfect storm of really, really wonderful things, wonderful toys in the toy box that not everybody in a career gets to play with. So I am the luckiest boy in the world to have been able to work on those things with the incredibly talented creative partners, both at Thinkwell and at WB and with the partner, Moral. It was an unprecedented experience for me. I had never worked on anything of that scale. And it's, I trust me, I look at those videos too and go, holy crap, how'd they do that?
Yes.
I feel like that's like thinking about that. That's got to be one of the of theme park projects in the last 20 years. That's got to be the most creative freedom that you could have as a designer, where it's like, here's a big empty space, here's a big budget.
Yeah.
Here's some IP. Here's a whole bunch of IP.
It really is. It really is. And we would regularly at Thinkwell sort of pinch ourselves and look at each other like, are we really doing this? Like, holy moly. Having said that, like, it's very easy to think of it on the same terms as like, an Imagineering project of that scale or scope, or a Universal project. And while it was from a quality and output level, from a structure level, it was very different. And that's because of a lot of reasons, but mainly, frankly, if Universal or Disney had built a park of that scale, it probably would cost 3 or 4 times what it cost. And I can't get into the details of that, but we did that at Thinkwell on a very lean team, and that's not a complaint. That's a point of pride for me. We did that entire park on the size of a team that Universal or Disney would have done on maybe one major land or one major attraction. It really was, and that is literally me sort of puffing out, going, yeah, we did this with a very, very small team, and everybody wore a lot of hats and everybody was super invested. But the reason it's so good and the reason you're blown away by watching those videos is because everybody knew we don't get this chance a lot. We have a really generous client and brand and budget. Let's put our all into this. And so everybody really leaned hard into making this good. That park, while it's not marketed at a U.S. audience, and it really isn't for a U.S. audience, the market for that park in that area, it's in a place called Yas Island in Abu Dhabi, where the Ferrari theme park is and all. That's literally the Orlando of sort of what's called EMEA, the Middle East and European region, because it's such a travel hub now through Abu Dhabi and Dubai that there's this millions of people who are a 2 or 3 hour or 4 hour flight from the park. So it's really marketed to them, right? It's like Southern and Eastern Europe, Middle East, Southeast Asia. And so it's really for that audience. That's why you don't see any marketing for it here in the States. They don't really care if you go or not. I hope you do. I hope you think about going, because Abu Dhabi is a fun place and there's lots of neat things to see, including our park. But you don't get handed that kind of opportunity often, and so none of us took it lightly at all.
But Dave, I got a question for you, and I mean, and this could be my cultural ignorance. Do the IP like Flintstones and Tom and Jerry and the Jetsons, do they still have a lot of relevance over in Abu Dhabi?
Yeah, they do actually. Remember, a lot of these brands are played ad infinitum and repeats and things. There's certain ones that land culturally more than others, for sure. Like the one that everybody knows in that region, and the thing I found out from Warner Brothers is this brand actually rates highest in the world for them in their animation category, and in some places higher than Mickey Mouse. Don't tell anybody. Is Tom and Jerry, and the reason for that is Tom and Jerry requires no translation. So it plays on every TV anywhere in the world on the cheapest TV station, because costs nothing to get syndicated anywhere in the world. And it's been like that for 50 years. And so I would get guys, 40, 50-year-old guys like my age in Abu Dhabi, they would see Tom and Jerry in the costumes out in front, and they'd run over and want to give him a hug, like the way we do Mickey, because they know it. They know it from their childhood. So like, if I had to pick one that's the strongest, that was it. And it was not so much unexpected as the attraction's great. The attraction is a spinning coaster in the dark. It's a cat and mouse chase. You're caught up in the chase, basically. But it's kind of a sleeper hit, right? Because of the affinity for that brand. But they know Bugs and Daffy, right? They know Tweety. They know Scooby enough because there's been enough of the other Scooby movies that have all been, in the last 20, 30 years, have all been translated. They're all dubbed everywhere in the world. Flintstones is a little harder because it is an American sitcom at the end of the day, right? Yeah. It's the Honeymooners. So they don't really know that one as well. They know it exists, but our ride and our characters are sort of an introduction for that, which is really fun to watch. They absolutely know the DC characters, especially from the movies, right, and the TV shows. This is a culture that, it's one of the reasons the park there is not a behind the scenes like movie park, because behind the scenes of who Warner Brothers is making movies, or the Spanish Moorish architecture of the studio lot and the history of the studio lot, means nothing to everybody. That's absolutely like meaningless. What they know is consuming this product on their flat screens in their homes for the last 20 years, and so there is an awareness of those characters in various levels. And what our job was to figure out what they know about the characters and enforce that, or find the things they don't know and celebrate it.
Very cool. And then, obviously you mentioned again, it's the world's largest indoor park, and we don't have a ton of indoor parks in the States. What is the biggest difference working with an indoor park as opposed to an outdoor park? Well,
the first thing to know is building an indoor park is not laying out and designing an outdoor park and just putting a roof on it. It doesn't work that way, because theme parks are all about expansion and compression, are architectural terms of reveal and turning corners and seeing things, and sight lines and laying up views like you have down Main Street to the castle, right? And that's an art form, laying out that ebb and flow of walking around a park. And the minute you put a roof on that, it's different. And your sight lines are different. So it's not that. What it also isn't, it's not a mall. We didn't want to build a mall and just put storefronts that were attractions. That would be a disservice to the brand and not a really good park experience. And frankly, a lot of indoor parks are that, because they're mall-like spaces that attractions have been put into.
Or actually are in a mall.
Or sometimes in an actual mall. Now, that's a little different. Like, I love Nickelodeon at Mall of America. It's one of my favorite. Yeah. As far as a thrill park and a regional park, it's such a blast. Because the brands are so silly. I love that SpongeBob dive coaster they have there. Yeah. It's pretty fun. But that's different. That is a regional park with a roof on it, which is an amenity. That's an amenity for a cold weather place. it's got its own level of reveal and theming as you go through, but you're not looking for an immersive environment. This is an immersive theme park that wants to feel like you're in a Disney park or in Galaxy's Edge or in Harry Potter. Like that was the goal, right? We wanted it to feel like these brands come to life. So this is a place where these characters live, work, and play, and we are right alongside them. So how do you do that? So the first thing to know about an indoor park is if we need the same amount of guest flow, the same attractions, same capacity for the attractions as an outdoor park. We need the same access to back of house. We need the same kitchens and bathrooms and all that stuff that you need. But we don't necessarily need the same amount of space. And so it literally is like you took an outdoor park, threw a lasso around it and like shored it up. And it makes everything a little tighter, right? And that does a couple of things. First of all, it puts a lot of back of house on the second level, which we colloquially called top of house. So a lot of the back of house in that park is actually on an upper level behind the scenes. It also made our reveals and sight lines a lot shorter, which is a good thing in an indoor space. But we have a lot of foreshortening for some of the things that are supposed to look bigger, supposed to look off in the distance. A lot of force perspective. But it made that sense of discovery, it made that expansion and compression more important in an indoor park than it did in an outdoor park. And we have more areas where you pass under something or under a bridge or under a rock formation or whatever to get you into that next reveal, right? Happens a lot more here than it does in a typical outdoor park.
How did you sort of design, like, because there aren't a lot of indoor parks like that, what did you do to sort of like test changing the foreshortening and like handling those different reveals and figure out, hey, is this still going to work when it's...
Sure. Well, a big part of it early on was acoustics, right? Because we knew in big cavernous spaces that could become really uncomfortable to stay in for a long time. We didn't want it to be a mall. We didn't want it to be Costco, and that was the danger. And so we actually, with the client and with Warner Brothers, did a lot of research, and we went to places like the Forum Shops in Las Vegas, to other indoor theme parks, to large indoor themed spaces, wherever we could find them. And we learned a lot watching that, because we learned what we didn't want to be in a lot of ways. And so we were sort of reinventing that. There hasn't been an indoor theme park that does this kind of level of immersion. But what you lean into, once you learn those lessons of big indoor spaces about acoustics and lighting and comfort level, which is at the end of the day, a lot of it was driven by comfort. A lot of it, you're in a theme park for 8 to 12 hours. You can't have fatigue. And people don't realize that, like, the sound of being an indoor, echoey indoor space for more than a couple of hours can create physical fatigue. And so we did a lot of studies about that, about what is the acoustics, what's the dB level, what's the, how do we abate some of that, and how do we create moments of quiet? Because in an outdoor park, you have that all the time. Like, you get off Big Thunder Mountain, which is big and loud, and then you go have your churro and you sit next to the rivers of America and you have this nice quiet moment. Like, we needed to make sure to build those things in. And so we did. But there wasn't a lot of precedent for that. And so a lot of it was benchmarking other places. A lot of it was just leaning into the opportunity of knowing that we had complete control over time of day and lighting and audio everywhere. And so we tried to make one of the big things you'll notice when you look at park walkthroughs is each area is very different in terms of its outdoor, air quotes, outdoor feel. When you come into Warner Brothers Plaza, which is like our main street, basically our central hub, it is sort of goes between magic hour and bright day, and it goes back and forth. And it also has a night moment where we do a big show, a registered projection show on all the facades called the Cinematic Spectacular, which is like our fireworks show, for lack of a better term. And instead of using it at the end of the day, we actually do it at the beginning of the day. It's our rope drop moment. Everybody gathers there, and it's our rope drop that the park is open. Metropolis is always magic hour. It's always purple. Yeah. It's always heroic, right? Gotham, of course, is always nighttime. The sun never rises on that part of the park. When do you get that chance, right? You look at people say, "Oh, why don't you do Gotham in a theme park?" It's like, have you seen that in the Florida sun? That'd be terrible. Like, people are going to look right? Like, so we leaned into that pretty hard. And then you have the cartoons, which is like, how do we make this feel like you're in a cartoon? It's very flat lighting. If you look at everything, there's no shadows. There's no night and day. It is constant, bright color, flat, everything. And that's on purpose. And like, we knew we needed a lot of downlighting for that. So that is hidden in big puffy clouds in the ceiling, these giant cloud structures, which were not an off-the-shelf thing we found some vendor to buy from. Like, we had to do tests to figure out, what do we need up there? How does it get down? What is the lighting level down here 40, 60 feet below? You know, what temperature does that create up there that might get too hot to maintain? You know, there's so much in an indoor park that's different. But it really was about leaning into the opportunity of a completely theatrically controllable environment.
Awesome.
Well, there are some fantastic videos. I personally have not been to Abu Dhabi. I know Andrew Hyde from In the Loop, he did a really good walkthrough that's like 23 or 24 minutes. Oh, really? And Andrew Hyde, it's great.
Send it to me. I haven't seen that one.
Yeah, he's got the cinematic spectacular. He's got ins and outs of all the rides. I mean, I don't think he filmed POVs on the rides because you're not supposed to do that, but I'll send you that video for sure.
Great.
And then the last thing I want to get into, you, Dave, it's just a couple, current event-ish questions. By the time this part of the interview or podcast will air, it'll be probably old news by now. So I guess my first question, Eric Idle has been in the news recently for some tweets he had about Figment and not remembering that Figment existed. My one thought is, do theme park fans just need to take a chill pill and just relax?
Yes. I actually tweeted about this. I was sort of ranting about it, and a couple of people took it the wrong way and sent me nasty DMs, and screw them. But no, I mean, you have to think of it this way. An attraction, first of all, most actors who work on anything don't watch and rewatch their performances.
Right.
Yeah. Mark Hamill hasn't seen Star Wars as many times as you have. Right? He doesn't notice every last detail and doesn't like being reminded of every last detail that he made as a young actor. Like, let's just be honest. These are human beings. And as artists, they are doing a job. And so, Eric Idle, even his clapback was the funniest, where he's like, here's a message for all the stupid people out there. When we film these things, the little fucker isn't there. Which, like, I wanted to hug him for that. Like, good for you, Eric Idle. But, like, it's true. He probably did that entire shoot in a couple of hours in LA one day in the mid-90s. And, of course, he doesn't remember it. He's never even been to ride it. Like, holding him to that standard, to the standard of you who've been on it a million times, is just short-sighted. Like, cut the guy some slack, for Christ's sake. He's had a storied career of decades of he's done some clunkers, but he's also had a storied comedy career of amazing things. And so for him to not exactly know if Figment is and mistake him for the one from Quest for Camelot, whatever, they're both animated dragons. He got close enough. Like, cut him some slack, for Christ's sake.
I'm actually impressed that he guessed the Quest for Camelot dragon.
Yeah, right. But again, put it in perspective. He was hired for a job. He probably was in the studio for like a couple of hours with no actual Figment there. Delivered his lines, was as funny and charming as he normally is, and then he went home and got the paycheck. That's it. And to hold him to some standard, this is exactly the same as like comic book nerds going to Comic-Con and lining up in Hall H and asking the dumbest question of performance. In episode 4, did you understand what your motivation? Like, come on, people. Like, honestly, like I love that people are that kind of passionate about what they love. That's right. But don't aim your ire at the guy because he doesn't have the same passion for you do. It was a job, for Christ's sakes.
Now I'm second guessing every question I've asked on this podcast.
No, I would call you on it. If you asked something like it was to comic shop guy from The Simpsons, I would totally worst question ever.
Okay. And then another recent news item is Disney announced pretty recently that they are going to revamp some certain scenes in the Jungle Cruise.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Well, first of all, I love the idea. First of all, I'm glad they're not necessarily leaning to the IP of the new movie because that's an unproven thing. Nobody knows if it's going to be any good. I hate when they sort of hang their hat on an IP if it isn't beloved yet, like assuming it will be beloved. And Disney doesn't usually do that. They're usually pretty good about waiting until the cultural moment is right, that everybody loves something, to sort of dive in and go all in theme park wise for the IP. When you look at how they are staying within the world of the attraction we know, that's smart Imagineering. And Kevin Lively's a great guy and really talented, and has worked. He was a skipper, right? So he knows that world. So good for them for keeping it in the family, as it were. I really love that.
Yeah.
And that expansion of that world of who skippers are and other adventures they've done is a really, really smart way to expand that attraction. And people are saying, well, it's never had a story before. Does it really need a story? I'm like, well, it's going to be a light story. It's going to have more of a B story. The A story is the cruise you're on. The B story is this lost cruise that creates situations for your skipper to riff on and make jokes on. So we're not going to lose that culture. We're not going to lose that jokey, skippers make up their own jokes and put them in for approval, and they get done. My favorite one, by the way, was a guy that's his all-time favorite Jungle Cruise joke. He says, that tiger can jump over 30,000 feet when pushed from an airplane. And this guy was so droll. Like, everything he did was this left field weird, he's like, the other one was like, they used to have a plane crash. Like, it was Florida one or the other one? I forget. Florida. They had a fuselage, right? And he goes, oh my God, there's a plane crash in the jungle. You know what a plane crash in the jungle means? Hippos. And in my head, I'm like, hippos launching out of the water to clamp onto planes and make them crash. It was just the most, like, the rest of the crowd was not laughing at any of his jokes, and I was howling because he was just weird and like doing his own thing, which, that culture is not going to go away if they add this story. If anything, it's going to get better because they're going to have more stuff to latch onto. As far as the people who are concerned that it's PC, I ask you to ask yourself why you think that. Because yes, the cultural depictions shown in that attraction are from a certain period. Cultures change, tastes change. The same thing happened when they changed the red pirate in Pirates, right? And people sort of argue that it was history. And Cynthia Sharp and I made a great point in an article we wrote for Thinkwell about how, like, if the Pirates of the Caribbean is supposed to be a accurate historical representation of piracy in the Caribbean, it's doing a terrible whitewashed version of it, by the way, because most of those people were people of color. So it's not a historical treatise. The Pirates of the Caribbean is a perfect example. It's a movie franchise now. It's this fantasy world. There are female pirates in it. That's an uncomfortable scene for families to explain to their kids. I'm sorry you don't see it that way, but this is not about PC. This is about it. Isn't it good to invite as many people to the table as possible? As attraction designers, we are appealing to a global audience, and that global audience gets more and more diverse. And as designers, we need to speak to everybody in the boat, period. And sure, the depictions of natives are fantasy from the 1950s, but they're also historically grossly inaccurate. There's nothing there that, and people are saying, yes, but it was always supposed to be just a joke. And I'm like, well, who was that joke for? That joke was for a predominantly middle-class white suburban audience of the 1950s and 60s. Yeah. And it's not that it's PC. It's that, why are we hashing out a joke that not everybody in the boat laughs at? Why can't the scenes represent everybody? Like, a perfect change, and they show this in the art, is instead of the colonialist with the 4 tribesmen of color on his quest being chased up the pole by the rhino, it's 4 hapless skippers. Great. Yeah. It doesn't change the joke. It doesn't change the joke at all.
It's a better. My first reaction was, it's a better joke. The joke of the story is the skippers are bad.
Yeah, it's so I'm not going to shame anybody who wants to hold on to the past. I understand. I see you. I understand why people hold on to the things they love. But nostalgia is not the reason to hold on to these things. And it is not about political correctness is not the reason this is happening. This is happening, same as Splash Mountain, because there is a much wider audience for these things. There's a very diverse audience. And isn't it our responsibility as entertainers to make sure everybody in that audience at some point in their day sees representation in the attractions. Representation matters, period.
Well said. Very, very well said. And I'm gonna end this podcast. We're gonna talk just a couple of your personal favorites of things that are in the industry right now. And my first question is, are you a roller coaster guy?
Yes, absolutely. I love coasters. I always have. I was giddy when I got to design coasters for Paramount Parks, and the suspended coaster at Warner Brothers World Abu Dhabi and the spinning coaster. Those were some of my favorite highlights, was working with the track layout guys and working with the engineers. One of our creative guys at Thinkwell, a guy named Jeremy Thompson, who you can follow on Twitter, he does a great website called rollercoasterphilosophy.com. He actually looks at the pacing of coasters from a philosophical and narrative standpoint. Even if they're not themed coasters, they have to have a sequence that works.
Yeah.
And he's come up with a notation sequence like dance and music for coasters. He's a genius. It's unbelievable. And that actually went into our design for those two coasters. So I loved that process of super nerding out on coaster design and layout, because I'm not an engineer. It's not my thing. But I do love them.
Do you have a favorite?
I probably have a favorite kind of sort of each kind. One of my top favorites is Tatsu at Six Flags Magic Mountain here. I think of the flying coasters, it's my favorite merely because of its placement on top of that mountain is absolutely terrifying. You are so high up, and when you go through that pretzel loop, you're like, it's not even that it's a record breaker. It's the terrain that you are flying over is the closest to feeling like you're flying, because it comes close to the mountain when it needs to feel fast, and then it goes high enough for you to go, oh shit, how high up am I? I love that, and it's a beautifully paced ride. It's obviously a B&M, so it's super smooth. I love Tatsu with all my heart, and it scares the absolute living crap out of me every time I ride it. I'm a sucker for Space Mountain, California. It's a master class in speed isn't everything, because it's only like 30 miles an hour. But in the dark, as those turns get tighter and tighter and tighter, you could swear that the last start of that ride is at like 60. And then and then it ends on that left turn you don't expect. It's just, I've ridden it a million times and it still gets my pulse pounding. So that's a favorite of mine. I'm not like a connoisseur. I have been on a lot, but the last time I went on like a coaster tour of the US was in 2000. So there's a lot I haven't been on since then. But like I would say the number one, so those are probably my 3 and 2 choices. My number one choice would be the Beast.
Of course.
Because mainly because when I worked there, I got to ride it first thing in the morning as they were doing test runs and warming it up, and it was getting faster and faster. It was better than coffee. I would show up at like 7 in the morning, ask the maintenance guys, hey, can I ride? And they just put me on over and over and over and over and over again before my first meeting. And that's another one where it's a master class in, you have no idea what is coming in that ride. And you have no idea how long it is. Because you get to that last turnaround and that helix is terrifying, and you think you're done. And then, nope, sorry. Here's some more,
Right.
And sort of in line with that too was the first couple of years of Ghost Rider at Knott's. I know it's had some age problems and some trims and things.
It's better now.
Is it better now?
They refurbished it a couple years ago, and
oh, good. I haven't been on it since. I mean, that's another one where that one, the minute you make that turn into the last part, feels actually dangerous and actually out of control. Like I love it when a coaster can make me go, I'm actually going to die. I know how these things are built, and I'm going to die. And my first ride on Ghost Rider and the Beast did that, where I was like, I can't believe this is putting the forces on my body that it's doing. Who designed this? They're insane. I want to kill them.
Okay. All excellent choices. I'm on board with all 4 of those.
I 100% agree. So I've got probably a very loaded question now. It's going to be the last question I ask on this podcast.
All right, I'm ready.
And you are somebody who you were the creative director for one of the most iconic dark rides of all time. What are some of your favorite dark rides today?
That's not that hard. First of all, I have a giant crush on Mystic Manor at Hong Kong Disneyland. When I talk about that ride, there's little cartoon hearts popping off of my head because I think it's so charming and fun, and it's it's the ultimate expression of a trackless and how that can be cool. Pooh's Honey Hunt is very, very close to me on that for the same reason. They're just charming, and their use of trackless in a really fun way. They taught me about how, most dark rides are distance equals time, but trackless dark rides are time equals time. You can do whatever you want, And so, and Mystic Manor, that Danny Elfman score, those beautiful gags. It's such a beautiful reinterpretation of what the Haunted Mansion means for a culture that ghosts are very different. So it's not about ghosts; it's about mysterious haunted objects and things. I love that ride so much so that the Scooby-Doo Museum of Mysteries at Warner Brothers World Abu Dhabi is a giant, big, wet kiss love letter to Mystic Manor. I stole from Mystic Manor left and right on that attraction. And it's just great. It's so charming and lovely, and I love it. Sally doesn't get talked about enough. They call themselves the Dark Ride Company, and they do such great work on stuff that is, a quarter of the budget that we spend on things like Men in Black. And those new Justice Leagues they've done, especially the latest, especially as they went along, they improved each one. The one at Magic Mountain here that is universal quality. That is a great, great, great dark ride. I love the amount of interactivity. I love the gags. I love the fire. I love those gags that are the falling 55-gallon drums on the rack.
Falling drum, yeah.
They took like a Halloween Horror Nights gag and made it into a really, really fun show action gag in a dark ride. Like, I have so much respect for John and Rich Hill and all the people at Sally and what they do, because they know their product and they do it really, really well. So Justice League is actually pretty high on my list for current dark rides. Symbolica at Efteling, I think, is really beautiful and weird. I don't understand the story because I don't speak Dutch, so I have no idea what happened, but it's certainly beautiful. Dream Flight at Efteling is bonkers. If you've never seen the video, it's like E.T. You know how psychedelic the last half of E.T. is?
Yeah.
Make that like 14 minutes long, and it's twice as psychedelic.
Wow.
That is bonkers, that ride. I love it so much. So that's high on the list. Well, I mean, I'd be remiss if I didn't say Rise of the Resistance. I had a giant nerd boner through the whole thing, only because, we all know it's going to be epic, but it's also like every trick in the book for the last 60 years that you can think of thrown into one ride. Holy crap. And that thing was oversold and oversold to me before I ride it. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. And then you go on it and you're like, it's pretty wonderful what they've done there. That is, as far as like seamless technology hidden into a story, it finds unique uses for all that technology that none of it stands out as like, oh, that's a great technological gag. It all supports what you're doing from a story perspective. I do love it. I mean, dark rides are a hard one for me to pick a favorite because it's such an interesting art form. And I'm so grateful and blessed to have actually been able to dabble in that art form. So I didn't mention it in my own because that would be boasting, but I do love how dark rides tell stories. So for me, it's like, I love dark rides, not because of the effects, but how each one of them takes that idea of taking you through story in a different way, in a unique way.
You sort of mentioned this when talking about Mystic Manor. Are there like effects or things that you've seen people use in other dark rides more recently that you sort of think, oh, I wish I'd done something like this, or could have added this back into, like, I wish I thought of this when I was doing something like Men in Black.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. I mean, the infrared targeting system of Men in Black is very outdated at this point. All those shooting rides are all done with camera tracking. There's no actual embedded technology at all. It's a camera looking at the scene, and you can define anything as a target in virtual space, and it registers on your gun. So like, I rode the Shanghai version. Oh, well, let's talk dark rides if we want to talk book rides. Shanghai Pirates is, again, like, over. I had the highest expectations ever, and I came off that thing with tears in my eyes because it's so unbelievably beautiful and well done, and it lands every gag that it tries out. That transformation is jaw-dropping in person, and it took me 6 rides to figure out the geometry of how it works, and I finally did, and I went, you Muppet huggers, like, holy crap, where you hid that thing. Oh, it's so good. Like, preach. That's my favorite clean slang word right now, by the way, is Muppet huggers. My friend Dan Amrich, who is probably listening to this. Dan, I stole that from you. All right, Muppet Huggers. But the Buzz Lightyear at Shanghai Disney gets not a lot of press because it's just another Buzz Lightyear, right?
Yeah.
But the evolution of the game system that they developed for that, and how quick it is and responsive it is, because it's all camera based, and it's real scenery and map projection, and sometimes targets have embedded screens in them, or they're mapped projection on top of physical scenery, or both. It's the first time in one of those rides that I actually feel like I'm in a video game, because it has the response of an actual video game. It is cool. It gets no press at all, but it is such an evolution of an interactive dark ride that everyone needs to, and it doesn't really translate into video. So if you watch the videos, and the system that they're using at Ant-Man and the Wasp in Hong Kong Disneyland is very similar. So it's similarly snappy, basically. So if I could do anything to go back to different on Men in Black, it would be to just improve the game mechanic and make it a little. And another thing I would love to do, now that map projection is so inexpensive, we talked about this in theory when we designed the ride, but it was too expensive to do throughout the ride, is we realized that the recognition of when you missed something was as important as when you hit something. And when you hit something, it's easy. Their eyes turn red and they fall over or whatever. We wanted to do like misses on the scenery, like little alien green spots and things. Like we talked about map projection, but at the time, video projection and the camera technology to track you was like, it would have cost, $40 or $50 million extra to cover the entire ride in that technology. Yeah. But if I could add better tracking, faster shooting, and more integration of misses as well as hits, I think that would bring that ride into the next generation in a really important and profound way.
Well, Dave, we've taken enough of your time, and we are so grateful that you agreed to spend some time with Eric and I on this podcast. I know I'm sitting here and I'm just like in awe with just watching you tell stories. But for those, I'm just, again, huge fan. This has been so cool, such an honor to interview you. But if you want to tell the listeners where they can find you on social media, I know we were talking briefly offline that you're on TikTok now. Where can the folks find you?
So I'm at Dave Cobb, DAVECOBB, on pretty much anything. Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, all of that stuff. TikTok, I'm not. TikTok, I'm at eticket, E_ticket. And don't expect any theme park stuff there. That's me being a 50-year-old weirdo singing along with people, basically. And when I'm bored in pandemic boredom, just doing dumb TikToks and duets and stitches with people there. That it's not. There is one theme park hot take there. If people want to go look, I got a lot of hate for that. We go check it out. But yeah, add me. And again, it's a lot of personal stuff too. Like my Instagram, my Twitter is very sort of business focused, and I tweet a lot of industry stuff or cool technology or cool interactives or stuff that I've seen. Instagram is a little more of my personal life. If you want to see who I am and my lovely husband and the life we lead, that's all there. But yeah, I love interacting with fans online. So slide in my DMs if you have questions about Men in Black. I'm always up for that. I like to make sure people know that I have benefited in this industry from the fandom and from the communication that happens in the fandom. This is something the generation of Imagineers and creators before me did not have. And so I absolutely do not take that responsibility lightly. And I am absolutely an open channel for people to say hi and ask questions or nerd out, whatever you want to do. Tell me you hate me. Tell me you love me, whatever. Let's engage.
There's no hate here. It's all love. It's all love. That's going to do it for this episode of the Coaster101 podcast. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably know we're a website. Coaster101.com is the name of the site. We are also, like Dave, we have one social media handle for across all the channels. We're at Coaster101. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, fan mail, not hate mail, because it's all love, send us an email, podcast@Coaster101.com. A big shout out to Justin Mabry of JM Music Design for our theme music. That'll do it for this episode of the podcast. We will talk to you all next week.